It's Brigid, and it's time for Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm thinking this morning, we had a really pretty sunrise today. It was like you can see the bluish sky coming in, but sometimes the clouds will like erupt into kind of like a pink and purple on the horizon. I always like try to get a good photo of it. This morning, though, there was just too much bright light in the face, so it didn't come out too well. Good morning, Sam. So today was just really pretty. It's still really cool here, very, as I've mentioned over the last few days, very autumnal. So today's a good day. My sister and I are going walking today. I have a lot of other stuff going on today as well. I have classes that I'm putting together. I have, and I'm going to try to do another channeling session today. I know that I did one actually on the 7th, I think was the date that I had on my thing. And last night I sat down and created the video. I went through the video of my channeling session, which is and I did some editing on it and so forth. Right now I have it uploaded but not public, so I don't quite know yet. I'm not quite sure yet about making those public or whether I'm going to just make them something that's available through one of my, like I said, I think I said this the other day, my transition life coaching groups, or whether or not it's something that I'm going to put just out on YouTube for general consumption. I'm still kind of on the fence about that. I have to see what is warranted there. But in any case, it's been a rather interesting week where I've been sort of trying to let go of. I mean, I always have plans every day, but trying not to get too bogged down in plans, because I will find that all of a sudden, say, oh, okay, I'm planning to get these 3 things done in the evening, and then different things will come up. And especially if it's client work that comes in, and somebody says to me, oh, hey, can you do this for me? Like, I need something like this evening or now, and then it's like, okay, then I typically, if I'm able to, if it's not too intrusive, I will just drop things and say, okay, yeah, let's do it. Now today, what I wanted to talk about, and by the way, I did want to say a little bit about the coaching thing, because when people go to my website, they see basically there's 2 services. There's coaching services and transition services. And people are kind of confused about what that means, especially people who are looking for tarot readings and things like that. Basically what it is I offer a 1-hour session. And what I have found in the past is that when people have contacted me for readings, let's just say they want a tarot or oracle or something like that, we end up getting into a lot of other areas. We end up maybe looking at their transits. We end up looking at their astrological chart. We may end up looking at, I may end up going into dream analysis. I may end up going into certain other areas and so I'm like, you know what? While I also do regular coaching, like if people, we start out at a certain point and then we try to work through and, like I said, just talking through and maybe using some of these alternate methods and alternate healing methods to try to, or maybe even some of the transitional work that I do to try to help somebody navigate the transitions they're going through. There are also people who will contact me for just an individual session, some individual advice just about like one situation or something like that. So that's why I keep it open, and I think that might be a little confusing to people, but I don't want to, what I want to get away from is a site where I'm like, oh, here are my tarot offerings, here's my Reiki, here's this. It's more holistic. It's more the idea of what do you need. So rather than going in and labeling it as one thing, it's just like, okay, when you come to me, let's talk about what you need right now, because maybe you're thinking about a tarot reading, but maybe you might be more suited to looking at something else. Something else might tell you more, that might be better suited to telling you what's going on rather than just tarot. So yeah, so that's why I just to let people know, that's why I keep it open and flexible like that. The thing I was going to talk about today, I don't have a topic per se. I mean, probably I have several. I did a live stream yesterday on Katonia, which I think, I'm pretty sure, Sam, that you were there. You saw that one. And I just felt like towards the end of it, I was just kind of like getting like, preaching the gospel of the terrible mother. But it's, but it was interesting how that was weird, because that just sort of came on. I wasn't, that wasn't, I was just really kind of giving an exposition about the archetype of what we think of as the dark feminine, or the quote-unquote negative elementary character, or the negative mother. And that just kind of, when I was done, I was just like, what just happened there? It was kind of weird. So, but in any case, I mean, not that I think it was bad. It was just different. I was like, okay, I've not gotten into that space where you're almost like, I almost felt like a preacher towards the end of it, and I'm like, okay, well, that was, you say really enjoyed it. I'm learning about the Jungian archetypes for school currently. I'm supposed to explore them. I'm drawing them out currently. Yeah, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's good that you're actually learning about them. They are, the archetypes are, as I was saying over there, a lot of times people try to associate archetype with personality, but archetype has nothing to do with personality. It has to do with these are kind of the forces of consciousness, or the unconscious, really. And that's kind of one of the root things that I talk about in my book, In Death and the Maiden, is the fact that consciousness is often seen as masculine and the unconscious is seen as feminine, even though you're going to have both masculine and feminine archetypes as part of unconscious content. As a general whole, that tends to be how it's seen. It's kind of that big encompassing kind of space that we belong to. So it was interesting. And I will be downloading and posting that today on YouTube as well. Because I know Instagram, I think they keep things up for a certain period of time and then they knock it off after so many days or weeks or something like that. So it is always available on the Katonia YouTube channel, and of course these particular morning coffees are always available on the Liminal Tarot channel. So anyway, last night so it was that, and then last night I had this dream that was very interesting. Now I have a lot of dreams that center around libraries because, in library it's more than, I mean, we can look at library and say, oh, okay, that's a place where you gain knowledge, that's a place where people go to do research. So there could be a whole symbolism there about researching and uncovering, and libraries can also be a place of imagination, because that's what a lot of times, I know when I was younger, I would go into the library, and my mother worked. I have the mother connection there with her too, with the library. And it's funny how I refer to the library as a feminine thing, right? But it was kind of a safe. It's kind of a safe place, and a lot of people view it as a safe place. Having worked there, I'm realizing it's not always a safe place, because I worked in libraries for more, like I said, I think over 30 years, if you count my time not as a librarian, but as a library assistant. That was my very first job when I was 15 actually. And then when I was 16, I turned 16 in like a week, so it had to have been like April of 1988. And then I worked there as an assistant I got my library degree in 1995. So it was 7 years as an assistant. Including, broken up by a stint overseas. I went to uni at Reading for just, it was just like a term abroad, things like that. And although I took most of my lit courses at Reading, so it's kind of interesting. But even then, I mean, I'd walk into the university library and I would be doing research, for my papers, and going through and reading the material that I was asked to read, and people would stop me in the aisles and say, oh, excuse me, this is, I'm trying to find this. I'm like, do I look like I work here? It's very odd. I talked to somebody at one point about having what I call librarian karma. I remember one day I went to Hackettstown for some reason, which is a town that's not far from here. Maybe I was going out to breakfast, because I used to go out to breakfast there quite regularly. I don't really do that anymore, but I used to do that. That was a thing. That was part of my routine. But I remember driving down the one Route 57, like towards Hackettstown, and I stopped for gas on the way, and then I stopped for something else. And literally every place I stopped, I stopped for gas, and I remember a guy asked me, the guy who was filling up my tank asked me, he was like, I have a friend who just got in an accident, and, there was this thing, and what do you think this person should do? And I'm like, why do I look like I would know what your friend should do about their problem? I'm like, call your insurance company? Like, I don't know what you expect me to tell you. And then when I got to the restaurant, I was sitting there, I always read when I go out, if I'm out by myself, I'm not out with somebody. And there was an older couple kind of sitting across from me, and then they started asking me about, like, had to apply for Social Security, and do I know what the Social Security office is? And I was like, again, wherever I would go, people always think that I know stuff. Like, oh, you can give me the information I'm looking for. That's what I call librarian karma. People always think you have the information. And sometimes I do. Other times all I can say is, this is where I suggest you start looking, but, I can't, necessarily tell you off the top of my head. But I just always found that kind of interesting, that mercurial kind of energy, because my Mercury is in the 10th house, so, which is why I write, teach, talk, but, that's kind of where it is for me. So, and librarianship also falls under that as well. So this was yet another dream that took place in the library. Now, library for me also has another connection because my mom was the one. The reason I got the job in the library, or not, I'm not going to say it was the reason, but the reason I knew to apply for this job, because I knew it was open, was because my mom worked there. And it was not in her department, because she didn't want me to work in her department, because people said, oh, you can go work with your mom. And I'm like, no, I'm not working. Even though my mom and I actually, on a work level, got on really well, because she was just there. This was like her part-time gig doing shelving, and eventually it turned in, she became the supervisor there for over 30 years. And she actually did really well at that kind of a job. Most people don't make any money or do anything at that kind of job. She actually did quite well at that. But when it came to that kind of stuff around organization, she and I were very much on the same page. There's a lot of people, they're just like, throw this on the shelf, it's good enough. And I'm like, no, you have to read, right, left, you have to get everything. There's nothing worse than being at the desk or looking something up and trying to find it, and someone shelved it like 4 shelves down because it's all in 331.4. Whatever. I hate that. And most libraries are like that. And when she ran it, it was never like that. It was like perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And you could find stuff. And since she's retired, you no longer can find stuff in that library, from what I've been told. So, it's so. And as somebody who worked as a professional cataloger for years, I'm very, very big on having the correct data, having the correct classifications, having the correct everything, having all the details right. Some people don't care about that. They just kind of throw stuff in. But I'm like, no, I want it. I like everything. I like my database to be clean. And I don't always get my way on that, but I do like a clean database. So, so anyway, the library tends to show up a lot, even though I technically retired from library in 2021. I just decided this was not the work I wanted to do anymore. Now, in this particular dream, it was kind of funny because I was, I was doing tech stuff, but I wasn't like in the library at that point. It was like I was with somebody's mom, and I think, speaking of library, it's another friend of mine who does still work in a library, who I've known since like 1985. Like I've known her since middle school, and she was. It was. I think it was her mom I might have been talking to, and she had a computer, and she was trying to find out what was on this disk. Now, this disk was a 5 1/4 inch floppy, so I don't know if you're old enough to remember the 5 1/4 inch floppy. Those were the original. Personal computers that kind of came out, I guess some of them at the end of the 70s, but really in the 80s. My first personal computer was one from Drexel Burnham, which was one of those big 80s like scandal companies that went bust. My brother had worked for them for a while, and he had gotten me. I think it was his partner who had gotten me the PC and a printer that went with it, a good old dot matrix printer, because at that time we were moving up from typewriters in terms of writing papers and stuff. So I had this with like a really like primitive version of Microsoft Word on it, because I think it was an IBM PC, but they tended to have Windows prototype on it. Basically, you could use the arrow keys to tab through and hit enter on things. But so it was that kind of a machine, and they had the 5 1/4 inch floppies. I don't know, they had like no storage on them. It was like, I don't know, it was like you were lucky maybe not even 100 kilobytes. I mean, it was like there was like no space. And if you had to install a program from these, it's like you had to put in like 10. It's like go to disk 2, go to disk 3, because they just didn't hold very much. Of course, the whole computer didn't have more than 640K. So very, very different from now for sure. But this one was weird because she was trying to find out if there was like something to fix some game that she had, like some kind of computer game. And she thought, I think that's what's on this disk, but I'm not sure. So what you do is you put the disk in and you run a directory on it to see what's in it. You do a dir command. But when it came up with a J drive. And I was like, is J the right drive? Because normally it's C, and normally the floppy drive is an A. And I was asking her, I'm like, is this the right drive? And from what she was telling me, I was kind of like, I don't know if she's really got this right. So her son happened to be around, and her son actually in real life did work in computers, although he dealt more with Apple. And he also is, I think he is now a librarian. I don't know if it's him or if it's his wife. I think it might maybe both of them. I don't know. Anyway, I think that he did get his library degree, and so he is working as a librarian now. But I stopped him and I said, hey, is this right? I mean, is the core drive on this called J? And he was just like, and he kind of laughed. And I mean, I got kind of a half answer, but basically I got the sense of, yeah, that's right. So I did the directory and I was looking at what the files are. I don't remember what they were. But then it was like we were all kind of sitting around, and I almost feel like, yeah, like it was doing the library tech support kind of thing. Well, I wasn't in tech support. Only one job that I actually did library tech support in that kind of a way. But we were doing something, and I was looking at my foot. I didn't have shoes on. I was looking at my foot, and I had a splinter in my foot. So, and now splinters, of course, tend to represent, and the fact that it's in the feet. Okay, from what I've known about that, a splinter in the foot has to do a lot with. I mean, certainly splinters have to do with things that annoy us or are problematic to us in some way, and the fact that it's in the foot. It just seems to be wounds or suffering connected to loss, because the feet are what connects you to the earth. So there's like sort of a catonic thing about it. So I said, okay, I'm going to get this splinter out of my foot. But as I'm pulling the splinter out, it just keeps pulling out and pulling out and pulling out. And eventually it becomes a paintbrush. Okay, that was so weird to me. I am like, how was something like this lodged in my foot? Okay. So I have this paintbrush, and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, right? It was like, and then I was looking at my foot, and I'm like, saying, okay, this creates such a wound, this is gonna bleed a lot, But the blood, because the top of your feet, where you have a lot of veins, and of course, anything that's happening to your feet, you're putting all the weight of your body on it. So I was worried about what bleeding is gonna be like now that I've pulled this thing out. And the blood wouldn't quite come to, it was the right foot, by the way. The blood wouldn't really come to the surface. It was almost like it was just pooling in the bottom of the foot. And I was like, crap, I have to put my foot up. I need to do something, because otherwise, it's almost like my whole foot's gonna break open and explode or something. But what was weird about it was kind of like it started to pool in the heel, and next thing I know, it had transferred itself to the left foot. And then there was like an opening, and the blood started to come out. Not pouring out, but just like a little at a time. It was just kind of like coming out. And I was looking for a plaster that was like the right type to kind of put on it, and it was weird. I kind of like had this thing. You ever see? I don't know if you ever, like if you go to an Outback Steakhouse and they have those blooming onions, where it's just kind of like they're just kind of in this pattern. That's what the bandages were like. I was like, okay, trying to get one off. It's kind of annoying, but I remember, and I was trying to talk to my coworkers about it. I'm like, how weird is this? And I just feel like they were just kind of looking at it, but didn't really say anything about it. And then I was thinking, I'd really like to go home at this point. But it was like, somehow in all of that, only 2 hours had elapsed, and I still had like the rest of the day. So it's only 11:30, and I have to work till 5. And I'm like, I don't want to work another 5 hours. And so, interesting, right? So I did a little look into what that might have meant, and it's almost like, because weird, I kept getting, like when I did cartouche, I kept pulling Ankh with Ta, which is kind of like, to me, that's life work, right? What you're doing. And one thing I always have done is whenever I have had certain wounds, whether they're from this lifetime, whether they're from family, whether they're from another one, I've always wanted to express those creatively, okay? And good morning, Melissa. I'm just talking about this really crazy dream I had in which I pulled a splinter out, and it was basically a paintbrush lodged in my foot. So it was, so I always look at that as, okay, you are taking your wound, you are taking, and really a lot of that has to do with fear of death or concerns about loss or things like that. And I know, isn't it? It's weird, isn't it? And turning it into something creative, because the paintbrush often represents the way in which we express a talent or something. So, and I thought, yeah, that's funny because a lot of my work is around death, but it's still in a library context. So there's almost that, so there's that teaching component, there's that, it's creative expression. And of course, a lot of the fiction that I write, which I was talking about the other day as well, is an expression of some of those. I mean, they're not about my life, okay? I mean, the stories, some of them are fantastical. They're not about my life, like in terms of like, oh, here's an autobiographical work about Brigid. I mean, it's not. But some of the wounding that the characters experience is in some maybe other form wounding maybe that I've experienced, okay? Or it's certainly, sometimes it's very exaggerated in the novels, but, when you're dealing with something emotional like that, emotions can amplify things, can make them feel bigger than what they are. And so I feel like this was a case of that. Like, this was, it was amplified. Like somehow this was, it's like the creative writing allows you to kind of go into story. If anybody's ever read Bruno Bettelheim's Uses of Enchantment, okay, that's an interesting book that I point people to when I talk about how myth and story and folktale is used as a guide path through the psyche and also through the kinds of wounds that we have. And so, and what Bettelheim talks about in that book is he basically talking about doing child therapy. And a lot of times when you're doing child psychology, it's play therapy often is the way that was used. D.W. Winnicott was another traditional child play therapist. I had studied a lot of them in grad school. And so the idea is that the way in which either the child is playing, what they're imagining, because a therapist will say, oh, so what are you playing and what is that? And so the child will explain to you, oh, well, this is this and this is that, but this happened here. And you start to get a sense through that language because children are not at the point where the rational mind has taken over. They haven't been to school. They may be learning language and they may know language, but they're still in that identity formation stage where a lot of that unconscious symbolic content is still the way in which they frame the world. And so that's the way that you have to do it. And what Bettelheim also used to do is he would read fairy tales to the kids. And then the kids, if they what you could tell a lot from what kind of a fairy tale a child gravitated towards. What kind of, where they would, I'm trying to remember a specific example from the book. There's that story about the man who is the fisherman and he has his wife and his wife is always, he finds a magic fish who gives him, grants him like a bag of gold or something like that. And then when he brings it home and tells his wife is like, wow, you got to go back to this fish. Now I need this. Now I need that. And it gets to the point that the fish finally is like, your wife is a bit of a problem. But the thing is, he's kind of stuck because his wife is making him do this and he knows he shouldn't be doing this. And at some point it's like his life is threatened and there's a way that he manages to get out of it. And I remember the child in that one was like, oh, I like that story because, when this thing happened, he was really clever and he managed to sidestep it by doing this. Just like, when my parents do this, this is what I do to kind of, sneak until I'm not in the middle of it. It's like you get things out that way through story. You relate to things through story. That's why when they get caught up in certain TV shows and stuff. Now all of that can be a kind of an escape too. Sometimes we just do that because we, they're what Eliade calls distractions, right? They're things that where we don't have to focus on the day-to-day crap of life, that we might have to deal with. And that's fine too. That's also a thing. But sometimes the things that we find we really gravitate towards or really are emotionally moved by. Whenever I teach myth, I always tell people, look at what myths attract you and look at what myths repel you. If we read a mythical story and someone goes, oh God, that story really freaks me out. I don't like it. Okay, well then that's interesting because that's going to tell you something about what you have in shadow or where your wounds are or where your triggers are, right? If you're really drawn to a story, what's the element? What elements of that story are drawing you in? Is it because something terrible has a positive outcome? Is it because you have, or is there just something about the journey of that person that reflects an aspect of your journey, and maybe, and really the way myth is often used psychologically is if you start to understand the symbolism behind that journey, you're able to figure out where you're going. You know what I mean? Like you watch it and you say, oh yeah, what's happening, what this happening to this figure is kind of mirroring what's happening in my life, and this is what happened, and this was the outcome, and and that outcome symbolizes X and Y, whatever it is. And then you might think, okay, maybe that tells me there could be something in that I can connect to my journey. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same outcome, and certainly not literally the same outcome, because myth is, it's not, you're talking about really, at least one level of interpreting mythical gods is that they do represent forces of the psyche or forces of the unconscious. And by the way, when we say forces of the unconscious, it was like one of my professors used to say. She would say, people would say, well, that's merely psychology. And she'd say, well, there's nothing mere about psychology. It encompasses everything, including our concepts of God and everything else. And to say that, because we think of psychology as something that's trapped in our brain. It's like, oh, it's just your thoughts in your head. No, that's the ego consciousness. That's the thoughts in your head. And maybe the personal unconscious, as Jung would have said, that's where your memories are, your nostalgia for things, any traumas you might have had in this life, that's all stored there. But the collective is something bigger. It's something you share with everybody else. And that level of things is going to have a certain amount of symbol. And depending, again, on how your own psyche interprets or filters in that information, some of that may be based on your own experience or your own culture or different things, but the kind of archetypal ideas it's pointing to, or conundrums or conflicts or truths or whatever, are going to be the same ones. I know there's a lot, anthropologists hate when you talk about universal truths, but the reality is that some things are kind of universal in character. So in any case, if you've joined late, the dream I was talking about was where I had a splinter in my foot and I pulled it out and it was a paintbrush, and then I was dealing with the blood in my feet. Like it's like it wouldn't come out above the skin, but it was just kind of like filling up my foot. But then, like I said, it transferred from the right foot to the left foot. Now that's another thing too, because that's a movement from the masculine to the feminine. Okay. The wounded the masculine wound there, pulling this out, dealing with that masculine wound creatively, and then having the healing taking place on the feminine side. Okay, because at that point it was like that blood that was trapped was able to kind of, come out, like siphon out, but not like gushing out, like just very slowly kind of coming out. And the fact that I was in this place, and it's like, okay, you've got to be in this place for a little bit longer. So that says something to me. I don't know. I've been still trying to figure out the symbol of the library for me, because like I said, there's so much personal attachment to it. And there's also what you might think of as the symbolic meaning of it, because it's both a place of protection where people may go to escape, where people might, to read or to do different things. But then people may also go there to research and to learn. So it's kind of both. And when I pulled a card on it this morning, I got like the 9th house kind of stuff. So this is about not only spirituality, but about education and about things like that. And also about travel and moving on and moving ahead. So it may be just kind of saying like, okay, there's still something here to be learned, healed, or researched before you're going to move on from it. So that's the way I interpret that dream. And I mention this also because I do dream analysis for people. And the point that I always want to make is that when you go very deeply into dream material, there is something that's being shown to you. Your own inner wisdom, your own connection with the collective is trying to show you something about what's happening on your path, or maybe places where you're stuck, or places where you're anxious, or places where if you pay attention to the dream material, it may be giving you a clue as to what kind of decisions you may be making, or maybe telling you something about decisions you have made. Or how that connects with your past. So I think it's very interesting stuff. And very important. So, okay. As usual, I've kind of chattered on till 7. So let's do our reading for the day. And I feel like I want to do one of these. I want to do the astrology cards as well, but I'm going to start with this, and then I'm just going to pull an astrology cards to see what we get for the day. So, okay, so what do viewers of this live stream and people who may view it afterwards need to know? Let's see what we got. Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. All right. So our first card, and this was interesting because this is the first card that came. It's come up in a few readings. Healing. So this is the King of Cups. Okay, healing card. And those of you who do Reiki will kind of recognize the idea of, you know, healing via that kind of open palms. There's this so we have this idea of healing, and so so it seems like that seems to be the theme. Like, how do we look at our wounds? How do we how do we how are we, what's going on in the process of healing for us? Because all of us are healing from something. Okay, we're always in a process of healing because there's always a wound. There's always a wound. It's like that Chiron aspect where there's always that. Remember Chiron, the mythology of Chiron, as he's the wounded healer. He's been wounded, but because he's immortal, he can't die. Now, at some point, he does actually die. I think he swaps his immortality with Prometheus. They swap, and then he's able to finally rest. But they have this. We have this healing that's going on here. Okay. And so that's our central theme for today. And the inner feeling of which we're unaware is the Six of Cups. Now, this is interesting. Six of Cups, again, something about the past, a connection to the past. A soul connection that might be about this lifetime, could be about another one. But we have this, but you see, this is the card of the dream. So this is the girl kind of sitting there wistfully looking at a couple. Okay, like a romantic couple. So it's almost that romantic, like the person who reads the romance novels, right? And says, like looking for, the Cinderella thing, the Prince Charming and the happily ever after. And basically the meaning of this card is that sometimes this card comes up when we think that there's going to be some happily ever after, or there's going to be some kind of situation where we are where we need to be rescued, or where or there's going to just be some kind of single thing that's going to be neat and tidy up and kind of fix everything. And oftentimes it's a little more complicated than that. And if this is our impression of relationship, that sometimes means that this card can mean that you might be a little bit, there might be a little bit of like a codependent type of fantasy there, where the idea is that somehow the partner is going to pick you up and support you and carry you off, when really like the message is like, well, we need to be able to look at those childhood wounds and look at that childhood stuff and try to kind of sort things out on our own. Okay. Partners are together, but they're separate. There's, I think is that one expression, let the winds of heaven dance between you, right? You are both your own people. You are not, you're not collapsed into the hero's arms. You're your own person. And ideally, in partnerships, there's an equality there, that you're both your own person. And it's not that one is dominating the other or anything like that. Like, this is about these masculine, feminine adjustments that we need to think about. And the external feeling of which we're aware is the politics card. As we can see, there's like this mask here, and there's this serpent. It's literally like the idea of the sneaky person who is, or the sabotaging force. When this card comes up, it's the way in which we play politics with the world, or the way in which we spin things to the outside world. But it may be a manipulation. So the fact that this is the external feeling of which we're aware, I find this card as a psychological thing often comes up when we have that little voice that everybody has. And it is connected to the soul archetype in some way. It's more of the negative character of the soul archetype that can continually make us feel that we can't do something, or make us, or sabotage us. If we're going along, we're doing something, we're building momentum. It's that little seed of doubt that creeps in and goes, oh yeah, but I don't know. Can you really do it this way? Can you, can you? It'd be so much better or so much easier if you just did this. It's like, some people might think of it as like a devil voice. I don't, because I think of the devil as a very complex symbol. I don't necessarily think, you can think of it as a testing kind of a voice, but it's oftentimes the inner critic that we have. It's the same one, like when you do something really wonderful, and then people say to you, and then you're kind of like, yeah, well, it was okay. Like, there's that part of you that it's like, it's never good enough, right? So that's the sabotaging force that I think of, that kind of finds a reason why the accomplishment that you have, or the thing that you're doing, or what you have to offer is somehow not adequate. And that, maybe somebody else or some other force maybe thinks they are adequate. Seven of Swords energy also can be about when we feel that there's information we don't have, like someone's talking behind our back, or something's going on where, maybe our perception of things is not the right perception, or we have hidden enemies or something like that. Like, that's Seven of Swords energy. But oftentimes I find that that's more of an internal thing. We're more paranoid that somehow we're missing something and we don't have it right. Okay. The advice card here is the maturity card. Okay. This is the Ace of Pentacles. And so this is assuring you that you are operating from a place of maturity. So you don't want to let this kind of energy define you, and you don't necessarily need somebody to rescue you, but there may be wounding. The fact that the healing card is right in the middle of these two suggests that may be the wound. Maybe we've always been told, there could be a script there about what the outcome is supposed to be, and how what our perceptions are saying, somehow this is not measuring up to that outcome. But that may be an outcome that is not realistic. Okay, it may be just like, no, I mean, not that the outcome still can't be wonderful, it just might not be, that the image of what you're thinking may not be quite what it is, or what it, it may not really be what you've expected it to be. So it may be a case of dropping expectations. The outcome is the Nine of Pentacles, which is the ripeness card. So, okay, if I read this as a whole, I feel like this is a situation that's saying, you're in the process of healing. Everybody's in the process of healing right now. And you are definitely at a place where you are beginning anew, and you are beginning with experience. You are beginning with a solidity of identity, of kind of knowing where you are. And things are ripe for the picking. So it's the sense that now you are at a point where you have enough in terms of knowledge, in terms of wisdom, skill, whatever your skills are, whatever you have to offer, you have enough to offer. But in the midst of your healing process, there's going to be these saboteurs that tell you that either someone else has to do it for you or can do it better, or that maybe you shouldn't do anything and just wait for somebody to come along and rescue you. And on the other hand, the idea that maybe, you think you're doing it good, but maybe I'm not, maybe there's this murmur in the environment. Because oftentimes when we hear people say things and then we're not quite sure what they meant by it, we're like, is that a criticism? Is that like a sideways compliments, about those? But sometimes it's not that they're doing that. Sometimes that's what we hear because there's a voice in our own psyche that's kind of, picking at it. For women, that's called that's the voice of the animus. That's the critic that says that starts comparing you and trying to see whether or not you measure up to other people and situations. And yeah, when you strike it out on your own, there's always going to be people and situations where they're going to say, people are going to roll their eyes and criticize what you're doing, like, oh, I can't believe she's doing that or he's doing that, and who cares? I mean, what it comes down to. It's like, well, if they don't like it, they don't have to participate in it, right? That's what I always tell people. As I mentioned the other day when I did my little spiel on rationality, it was like people will say, well, why are you getting involved in all this other stuff like this channeling? I mean, you're a rational, analytical, you're a data-driven person, and I'm like, because this is another way of knowing as well, and I want to explore that, and I think it's useful for people. And if I'm going to be focused less on that masculine side and more on the feminine side, I'm going to be dealing with receiving information rather than just me trying to dissect it. That's one way to know things. It's hardly the only way to know things. And if people say, well, I don't think that's valid, well, then you don't think it's valid. Then obviously you're not going to want to deal with my services and what I do. And it's not, you're not the audience for everybody. So. But those kind of people probably wouldn't do spiritual work anyway, or wouldn't necessarily deal in this kind of work. So I want to pull a astrology card. Let's see what we get here. Ooh, okay. We got 3 actually. This is interesting. Okay, so we have Saturn return. Okay, which is about age, which is interesting. We have the 5th house card, which is creativity. It's funny, I talked about pulling the paintbrush out of the foot. I mean, that's, it was a splinter and it turned out to be a paintbrush. I mean, that literally is almost what this is saying here. And then we have the 3rd house. We have messages, okay? So this is about, this is, again, Mercury energy. This is about communication. So this is just kind of weird because I almost feel like it's kind of reflecting what the message is of that dream. But Saturn return comes up when it's time for a correction, okay? When we need to correct something. And so if you're having a Saturn, so Saturn return is when we have this opportunity. First of all, it tends to slow things down, okay? And it's funny because in my dream it was like, it's only 11 o'clock and I need it to be 5. But it's like, yeah, it tends to slow things down, makes you go back, take your time, revisit places maybe that need to be, places that need to be healed, places where maybe, okay, this didn't quite work, so let's try something else. It's definitely this idea of correction. And creativity and messages, together those literally could have to do with creative expression through either writing or speaking or communicating. That could be a thing. But I would say more generally for people, 5th house is about, it is about creative energy. It's about being recognized. It's about being seen for the work that you do. Okay, so that does fit in with this idea of ripeness and maturity that we saw in the other reading. This is the idea. And this is a very happy card because really the message of it is you want to be doing what you love, because when you're, like I said, when you're doing what you love all the time, then you are happy. You enjoy your work. When I talk to people and they talk about the things that they really want to do and are really passionate about, like I said, there's a difference. You watch someone's face light up and, they could be talking to you, kind of like this, but then as soon as you mention that one thing, you just see the eyes light up and you see everything change. That's the thing that makes the person feel alive. And when you see that reaction in somebody, you say, okay, that's where you want to look in terms of how you want to creatively express yourself, what you want to do. Okay? And maybe we shy away from some of those things because we think, well, to really be successful at it, it might take time, it might be, but don't shy away from it, right? And the 3rd house messages, this is about really, again, on kind of looking at it on a broader scale, this is really about listening to the messages that come in, whether, and again, if you're somebody who works with guides, perhaps it would be from your guides. If you're somebody who just isn't necessarily in that milieu, then you might this would really be about listening to your inner voice, right? And hearing what your inner voice has to say, what messages are coming through for you. Pay attention to dreams, pay attention to things. There may be a message that's coming through here about what's going, how you would want to correct your path to move towards where you really shine and what really makes your heart sing. And that's really the direction that you want to go. Whatever it is, and like I said, who cares what anybody else thinks? You want to do it. If there's this kind of sabotaging energy of either it's too hard or nobody else, I've heard that recently too, like, oh, well, nobody else is really going to be interested in this. Oh, there's other people who are interested. There's always people interested. There's a niche for everybody. There's an expression, there's an ass for every seed. So yeah, there's an audience there. It's a matter of finding that audience and then allowing your talents to shine. And ultimately, there used to be a book, I know it sounds cliche at this point, but it was kind of like, do what you love and the money will follow. It's that kind of idea, like rather than focusing on just what's going to bring you income, which again, we all have to have bills to pay, so that's definitely a factor. I don't want to say like, oh, forget about money, who cares? But abundance often comes in when we're not trying to tightly control the process, that we kind of hang loose and then the opportunities come to us. Most people I know from doing human design have a strategy of waiting, standing back and waiting for that information to come in and then being able to do something with it. Even generators, there's this generator strategy is to inform, but and that's the most common type. That's why I mentioned generators in human design. But even so, depending on what your authority is, whether it comes from the sacrum or whether it comes from the solar plexus, so whether it's instinctual or emotional, when you listen, you listen to that authority first and then you act from that. But you wait until somebody gives you the information and then you act. So, yeah, so there's definitely again, passivity being that so-called feminine passivity. A lot of times we feel like when we're in a crisis, we have to jump in and take control of everything, but we may be just caught up in the panic of the moment, and that's not really always a good place to act from. So anyway, I hope that was helpful today. If you joined late, thank you to everybody who's joined. I was just talking about like a weird dream that I had. I'm going to say people who started from the beginning are going to say, yeah, you've said this like 4 times, but I had a dream that I had a splinter in my foot, and I mean, there was other parts to the dream, but when I pulled the splinter out, it was like I was pulling a paintbrush out of my foot. It was really weird. So that's kind of where this conversation all started, and that seems to be where the readings are, whatever the message is of that, because I felt like that was something I wanted to share today. So anyway, so we're at 7:16. So awesome reading. Oh, thank you, Melissa. I'm glad that this reading sounds like it resonated and like it's helpful. So I hope you all have a great day. For some of you, it is the middle of the day, like if you're not in the U.S., if you're not on the East Coast. But for those of you who are in the New York area, I love these. Thank you. You're good. I'm glad that these are helpful to you. And and of course I will be back tomorrow morning. So have a great Tuesday, and take care, and we'll see you then.